What's going on, hustlers? Back at you guys with another video. So today I'm going to be divulging the 5 habits that made me a multi-million-dollar salesman at 21. I really crossed that threshold at 20, but I made it to $3 million at 21. So let's get right into it. So number 1, leaving your ego at the door and following up. So many people make 1 phone call or even 2 phone calls and then they never call the person again just because they're like, oh, what if I'm annoying them? What if I'm bombarding them? Yes, that is literally the point. This is applicable to my industry in government contracting, but I can't tell you how many times in straight up like online mentorship sales or course sales that when I follow up with somebody, like the 3rd or the 4th time is when they're finally like, oh, okay, I'm ready to spend some money. And Grant Cardone said this. He was like, listen, not everybody's going to be ready to spend money with you at that exact moment in time. And then sometimes people are just busy and they just don't have time to get around to it. Especially if you're selling like a very, very high ticket offering, the kind of person that has thousands of dollars to throw around at whatever your offer is, more than likely they're at least, if not a high performer, somebody who's very busy and dedicated to what they do to some level. So leaving your ego at the door and being willing to follow up 4, 5, 6, 7 times. I've noticed in my experience, and other salespeople will tell you this, the bigger the transaction, the easier it is to conduct. Every time I launch a reoffer, and let's say I'm like my prices are increasing or I'm launching like an offer or something like that, and I tell people, hey, listen, you got 24 hours to do it. I literally send 4 to 5 emails within that 24-hour span. And I'll tell you, the majority of those transactions get conducted at like 10, 11:30 p.m. right before the sale is about to end after I've sent that 5th email. So leaving your ego at the door and mastering the art of the follow-up, which I can make a whole video on alone, but leaving your ego at the door and following up consistently, that's tip number 1 that helped me become a multi-million-dollar salesman. Tip number 2 is it's never about you, it is about them. So it's never about you, it's always about the customer. And I've had a very unique perspective because government contracting, you're selling to the government itself, right? But then you're also trying to sell on behalf of somebody else, sell somebody's product, and you're negotiating with them to get a price, right? So when I say this, I mean that when I'm talking to somebody and I'm trying to get a price, right, on some pricing and availability for a part, I never say, oh, hey, listen, I'm selling your stuff to the government. What's the best price you can give me? Hell no. They get hundreds of emails like that all the time. I say, listen, I'm coming to you. I'm hoping to drum up some business for you, right? Even if I sell something for 75 grand and I get the pricing and availability for the material at 50 grand, I am still bringing that person $50,000 worth of business. So I always approach the phone call and I'm like, how are you doing today? I'm hoping to drum up some business for you. And then the second thing is I ask a lot of questions about the person, about their business, about how they got started before I immediately start talking about pricing and availability. People's favorite thing to talk about in the entire world is themselves, so let them talk about it. And the better you are as a listener, the more people are going to perceive the conversations that you have with them as being favorable, right? So when you make it about somebody else and you ask questions and you're inquisitive and you ask, giving questions rather than taking questions, and you make it about bringing them business, then it becomes easier. And then on the other side of that, when I'm selling to the government, everything that I do is not about, me winning the award, them allocating those taxpayer dollars to me being able to get that notch on my belt, be like, oh, I'm at 130 contracts now. It's always about, hey, I want to provide a solution to your problem, right? I see that this solicitation has been open for 8 months. Nobody's been able to provide it. Let me provide it for you. And then let me give it to you at a premium price. And then let me make your life easier for you. And then I'll always ask them and be like, hey, by the way, do you have anything else on your desk that you need help with? So that's tip number 2. It's not about you, it's about them. Tip number 3 is understanding your product market. And this goes for any industry, any kind of sales. But it's a lot easier to command a price when you're selling something to somebody because you understand the product market and you can be like, hey, listen, this part is obsolete. These two companies went through a merger. The company that you have listed as the approved source no longer exists. This company is the only company that makes it. I just spoke to them because I have a contact over there and I know that the cost of the material has gone up exponentially. So that is why this is what it is. When you can provide somebody with cold, hard facts and evidence and empirical data, it becomes a lot easier to be like, yeah, you actually got to pay me 12 grand instead of 10 grand because you can give them the information to support that claim. And the only way you can get that information by understanding your product market and being, an expert on it. And then when it comes to, negotiating with vendors and stuff, somebody's trying to quote me an exorbitant price. I'm like, yo, listen, I'll call your buddy down the street, right? You're quoting me $800 for these bearings, but I'm getting them at $700 from your buddy across the street. I would like to keep the business here. I would like to do the business with you, but the product market dictates that these bearings are really worth $700. So unless you can give me a price that's lower than that, that's where I'm gonna go. And then, they get angry and I'm like, oh, well, listen, you've got, a couple other bearing manufacturers that have popped up in the area. They're approved sources. They filed their cage codes with the government. They're viable sources, right? So that's kind of how I approach it. And the only way that I can kind of go, my dad says, you go into these kinds of negotiations with a bazooka, right? Because it's you versus an entire company or you versus the federal government, at least in my arena. And the only way to be competitive is if you go in there with a knife or even a handgun, you're dead in the water. But when you go in there with a bazooka, and the bazooka in this instance being facts and information and an understanding of your product market, then it becomes a lot easier to make demands and leverage things, which takes me to point number 4, understanding negotiation. So there's 3 aspects of negotiation that are important. Every single negotiation book that you read, any kind of YouTube video that you watch about negotiation will tell you these 3 things. 1, you have to have a target price. And these are going to get, the order in which I say them is going to dictate their importance. So the last one is going to be the most important. So 1, you need to have a target price. 2, whoever speaks first loses. Whoever gives a number first, you lost. Like if I'm negotiating with somebody and you give me a number, I start licking my chops because I'm going to eat you alive. And number 3 is you have to be willing to walk away. If you're not willing to walk away, then it's not a negotiation. At that point, you're just fucking haggling. But if you can't walk away and be like, all right, I'm going to get it from somebody else, well, then you're just trying to get them to lower the price, but you're not really negotiating. And then they know they've got you by the balls or by the horns if they know that they're the only person that can give it to you. So you always have to make sure that you have the ability to walk away. And that comes from, setting up your infrastructure and having other deal flow and having other leads and stuff. And that comes over time, but you've always got to have the ability to walk away. And then, you always want to have your target price, and whoever speaks first loses. Now, one of the things that I have learned, and part of this could just be because I am Haitian, part of this could just be because I'm social and I love people. So I love the art of, fighting a street vendor in Morocco for an extra 3 dirhams or 30 dirhams. I love that. Like I eat, sleep, and breathe those interactions. But one of the biggest things with negotiation is like, if you're not embarrassed by your offer, you didn't go low enough or you didn't go high enough if you're selling. Like if you don't feel slightly uncomfortable, if you don't feel slightly slimy, I don't want to say slimy, but if you don't feel like you're slightly off kilter when you say that number, you didn't go low enough. And I do want to preface this by saying a good negotiation is when both parties win. But you've got to start low. And then if you start low and you give them an exorbitant number and then they feel like, oh, they've beaten you up to get you to a higher number, then both parties win. I believe it was like a Dale Carnegie book or something like that. Dave Seabold, and he talked about his dad talked about negotiations. And then he was like, a good negotiator always leaves some room for the other man to make money as well. So that ties into, starting exorbitantly low, because psychologically speaking, if, you end up starting off lower than what that person was willing to give you that value exchange for, but then they they feel like in their mind that they've beaten you up or gotten you to raise your price. In their mind, they've won, or they've made, some money as well. And then in your mind that you've won as well. So you're still scratching that itch of allowing the other man to feel like he's made some money in the deal, while still setting the parameters for that negotiation to take place and be successfully executed. And then number 5, this is super cliche, but I think it's more relevant than ever in today's world, where people's attention spans are lower than ever, and where we live in this instant gratification world. But quite simply, I just had a greater output than anybody else. I just literally submitted more bids than anybody else. I made more phone calls than anybody else. I sent more emails than anybody else. There's no substitute for hard work. There's no shortcut for hard work. You can ask anybody that's ever come into that office, anybody that I've ever worked with in that office. I literally stayed later than everybody else, probably 95% of the days. You can go look at any podcasts I've been on. You can talk to anybody that's ever worked with me. I literally just stayed in the office longer than everybody else. And I sent the emails longer than anybody else. And quite frankly, my output was just higher than everybody else. So when your output is higher, your results are just going to be better. So those are my 5 tips that helped me become a multi-million-dollar salesman at 21.